Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. I'm Lauren Smith with the International Franchise Association, and we have a great 30 minutes lined up for you. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that we are recording today's webinar and will make it available later this evening on community.franchise.org. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please add them to the chat box and they will be addressed toward the end. Today's topic is revisiting your candidate's financial requirements in today's environment, round 2, and it is brought to us by Benetrends. Here to provide today's discussion is Eric Schechterman, Chief Development Officer at Benetrends, and Dallas Curley, Managing Director at FranData. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Benetrends for sponsoring today's Lunch and Learn. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and as always, thank you to the IFA for all that you do for our industry, for suppliers, franchisors, and all franchise executives. And yes, very excited with today's topic. We did a session on this not many months ago about the different lending environment and how it's impacting franchise development and how taking on new candidates and what they should really look like from a financial side. So there was so much demand for more content on that. I figured why not solicit the great advice from the group over at FranData, and fortunately over there, somebody I look up to in many ways, and their managing director, Mr. Dallas Curley, was happy to join me. So Dallas, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and we're really gonna, in the short period of time, the Lunch and Learns, we really like to keep this more loose and open and just more conversational. Really just want to touch on some things of what we're seeing in the lending environment, lender appetites, what the banks are looking for, what you hear from the FranData side of the different changes there. Obviously, we're constantly hearing about how are the interest rates going to do things, how does it work with emerging brands versus established brands, and more importantly, what should franchisors be doing with that information? How can they make themselves more fundable to the lending environment? What should their candidates be looking like in this newer environment, specifically as it relates to SBA? And then, obviously, what strategies or just plans brands can have in place that aren't tied into specifically the SBA side. So those are just a couple of the areas that we're going to cover today. But really, just to get started, SBA is what's on the tip of everybody's tongue, no matter where we travel in the country as Benetrends, being a supplier to so many different brands. It's just constantly asked about what are we seeing, what are they changing? And I also think there's a big problem of perception and reality of there's not always a bunch that changes from the SBA side. More of what changes is how the banks adapt to what's available through them and the SBA program and what their appetites are. Before I start rambling in any one direction or another, which anyone that's ever heard me speak know I tend to do, Dallas, from your side of being such an intricate part of the lending space and not only being a supplier to the franchise industry, but also to the banking industry, anything that's standing out to you from your experience over the recent months or as we get into the last few months here of 2022 as it relates to the lenders?
I think lenders have a few concerns. First and foremost are how are brands and franchisees going to weather the coming economic environment from labor price increases, inflation, supply chain issues, and they're also stepping back and evaluating how did brands perform through COVID? Were they able to weather that? Did they add some technology? How did they do in COVID? Did they come out of it okay? Are they stronger now? And are they positioned going forward if we have another pandemic? A lot of questions from lenders. They're also looking at are brands reevaluating their business model? And that kind of leads into what you're saying. Do they need to take a look and reevaluate their franchise candidates when it comes to cash injections or post-closing liquidity?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a lot of the questions about, and this is probably more from the candidate side of, oh my God, these rising interest rates and what are these going to do with this? And, just wanted to call out or spend a moment of, yes, there are different things happening in the lending market, the different points, percentages of prime and what the lenders are looking for. But I think we're always a victim of our most recent history and what we remember from yesterday, last month, and last week. When people say today, or your candidates from the franchisor side, on the franchise development side, well, it might not be the best time to buy a business because, I mean, interest rates are going up. So prime today is 5.5. Just want to remind everybody that I think it was August of 2019, prime was 5.25. Over the last 10 years, prime has mostly been in the 5 to 5.5 range, but everyone's looking at it going up from 3.25, where we were pretty much for 2020 and 21 until they started making the increases this year. But keep in mind, that was due to the COVID environment where they dropped it to 3.25. The last time we were at 3.25 was in the housing crisis and the banking crisis of 08, 9, and 10. So just a couple things is I really wouldn't let some of those interest rates concern the candidates. And Dallas, correct me if I'm wrong. When lenders see those higher interest rates and the ability to make more money on these loans, typically it might bring some larger appetites in. They want to put money out there. There is a better return on that money, and now they can hold on to those loans for longer. Are you seeing that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because, the one thing that we've seen in the lender community, or many lenders have expanded their SBA departments due to the PPP incentives over the last few years. A lot of them have hired and poached BDOs from other banks and had to pay up a lot of money to entice those people to move over. So lenders are looking to expand the amount of loans, but at the same time, they need to stress test these loans at the recent NAGO conference with a 2% plus interest rate increase. So they want more loans, but they are tightening their credit boxes as well. So, those two forces are fighting against each other, trying to drive more business, but at the same time, trying to remain cognizant of the risk in their portfolio.
Yeah, I know the lending conversations are always interesting. We want more loans. We want to put money out there on the street. We want as many as we can get. And then it's like, but we only want this. It's like, well, if you want to do volume, you've got to open up your minds. If you want to be cherry pick, you're not going to get the volume. So, just like our worlds and franchisors and suppliers, banks are businesses, they're going to go through this. But again, on the candidate side, the interest rate's really not going to make a big difference as far as their monthly payments with most candidates. It's definitely not something prohibitive to where it should stop somebody from moving forward with buying a business. But I would say with all of the things that Dallas mentioned, from what brands are doing and these changes in securing lending, there are some things that the lenders are focused on. And it really is just about a balance between the business and the borrower. And what I always try to give an example of, there's two entities involved in this loan: the business that they're buying and the borrower. For those emerging brands out there, and Dallas, feel free to chime in here, but banks are still looking at anything with less than 50, that's 50 locations open, as an emerging brand. And if you're an emerging brand, it's not to say there aren't lenders out there that have an appetite for your loan, but none of those lenders are making that loan because they just want to work with that brand, no matter what the candidate is. When there's an emerging brand, you want to make sure it doesn't hurt the deal, but it's likely not going to provide much help. So meaning, if the brand isn't doing it, the candidate typically needs to be stronger on their end, specifically from a liquidity side, from what I've seen. And we'll talk about that. But Dallas, how about you as far as like emerging brands and the appetites that you're seeing?
I think that's the one thing that is surprising to us in the environment, are that lenders are still looking at emerging brands. And, the one theme that we keep hearing is, I want to get in on the ground floor. We're seeing a lot of
Yeah, I'll have to.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. I think somebody just unmuted themselves accidentally.
Okay. We're seeing that more and more lenders are looking to develop relationships with brands and setting up program lending. So in order to get on the ground floor, they are looking at emerging brands. But to your point, when they're evaluating a loan within the emerging brand, they're placing more of their underwriting emphasis on the candidate rather than the brand until that brand gets a track record. And unfortunately, we'll get into this later. We do fund reports on brands, and but not emerging brands typically. So a brand has to be franchising for 5 years and have 50 plus units in order to get that fund score. So where a lender would typically reach out to FranData and try to evaluate a brand looking at that fund score, they don't have that opportunity in an emerging brand.
Yeah, and a great point that Dallas mentioned before, what these lenders are looking for are brands that are being smart through in, out of COVID, in and out of this current lending environment, how they're growing. And that's the point of, today's conversation of, so what should brands be thinking about with their financial requirements? I mean, most franchisors, when they have their development page, everybody's going to list there or in their FDD. They go through all this detail of here's our franchise fee, here's the liquid capital, here's the net worth, here's the total investment, royalty, everything's mapped out. And my guess is most of the franchisors on here have this somewhere on their website. It's amazing, maybe another good word, scary, to find out that sometimes there wasn't as much thought put into those numbers as perhaps there should have been. And in this market, with what these lenders are looking for, as many loans as they want to do, they still want to see smart brands. Where were these numbers chosen from? Why is this important? So when you look at these opportunities, and what we're really seeing is how liquid impacts that candidate, especially with this explosion of emerging brands. So for example, if I am buying the example that we even have here on the screen, a $450,000 single location franchise opportunity, let's for sake of argument call it a brick and mortar business. So it's $450,000 all in between working capital, build out, franchise fee, everything else. Assuming the bank will do a loan for 75% of the value of that project, which you have the number right there, the borrower is going to inject around $112,000 to $113,000 in that 25% range. So if I go off of this brand that says they have a liquid capital requirement of 150, let's assume this candidate met that minimum requirement. They buy one location, and they pay their franchise fee or their equity injection out of their personal funds. That'll leave them around $35,000 to $40,000 left over in liquid. Dallas, from your end, is there a safe spot on a post-closing liquid side that you're seeing from lenders or experience, or sometimes is it based on the project itself?
Yeah, I think that varies across the spectrum. We see some banks that are trying to make an initiative into the franchise space, so they have a little wider credit box and are a little bit more lax on their underwriting. But having said that, a lot of that leftover liquidity is tied to how quickly do they get to break even, how profitable are they after 18 months, and the size of the initial investment, and the continuity rate of the franchise itself. So if you have a successful brand, the banks and lenders are willing to be a little more lax on the liquidity requirements.
Yeah, and from our perspective, what we've seen, that's probably a number that this would work out, for lack of better words. This has a lot of ups to it where I could see a lot of lenders saying this meets our minimum requirements and certain things. And that's not really the issue. Where we're seeing more of a challenge, and the reason this was kind of the purpose of almost revisiting this topic, because I got so many calls after the last one where people realize, yes, we have not looked at this and we have not considered that, is I don't believe many brands, franchise executives, they change their minimum requirements, their documented requirements, or even where their head is at mentally of what opportunities they want to show somebody when somebody wants to do multiple units. And it may get your first deal done, but that person's going to have a lot of hurdles either getting that one or the future locations done. Because looking at this same exact example here, if somebody is going to do the same $450,000 project, but now they're buying 2 licenses, and let's say those franchise fees are $80,000, and all of their requirements remain the same in what they have. Well, after I pay those franchise fees, which I'm likely going to pay out of pocket, I only have about $70,000 left in liquid. However, only the franchise fee that is used or dedicated to that first location can count towards my first loan. The other franchise fee can count towards that project when I'm ready to open that. But that money is no longer my liquidity, and it has no bearing on the existing loan that I'm trying to get for location number one. So now I have to inject more money towards that opportunity to meet that 25% requirement. So with that, between the franchise fees and my equity injection, I'm left with maybe $2,500 left over in liquid. And I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I don't believe there's a bank in the country that loan gets done. That a lender is going to say, we're going to go ahead and give somebody a loan for a $500,000 almost project that leaves themselves next to nothing in post-closing liquid. Now, there's other sources of income and certain things that can impact that, but that's just a good example of what we are seeing most people missing, is not realizing that, especially with brick and mortar, when you are paying multiple licenses up front, the lenders does not recognize those licenses towards the first project, only the costs that are tied there. I'm not sure, obviously you deal with this on a day-to-day basis on the FranData side, Dallas, but anything specifically that you've seen brands that you all worked with that are specifically on multi-unit, that they use any statistics or metrics to kind of monitor this?
I think the one thing and an aspect that a brand has to understand, and this goes back to your revisiting your candidate's financial requirements, is the business model and those requirements from a year or 2 years ago really need to be reevaluated. Because when we look at the rising in interest rates and the inflation on supplies and supply chain issues, labor costs and increase, that break-even point is going to move further and further down the road. So if they used to get break even in 6 months and now break even is 9 months, they're really going to need to focus on that post-closing liquidity and working capital. And they may additionally need to have a higher cash injection to keep that monthly SBA loan cost and still make the model work. So we do see many brands are reevaluating their model as far as if it's a brick and mortar, can they shrink that footprint? We worked with one brand that's a fitness brand, and they've eliminated some of the machines that they would typically include in their business model because it brought down that cost and enabled them to have a smaller footprint as well. So anything that the brand can do when they're reevaluating that model to ensure that it still makes sense from a lender's perspective as far as return on investment and cash flow to ensure that loan can get repaid is paramount.
Now, it's a great point, because not just the candidate requirements, but brands reevaluating exactly what Dallas just said, especially from a working capital side. I mean, the amount of franchise brands where it's standard, here's 3 months working capital. There's not a lot of lenders that are concerned if somebody says, well, we're looking for 6 months working capital, or we're more smartly evaluating that so the business owner can really operate the business the right way. Banks want to do smart loans, not the cheapest loan. So making your working capital the cheapest it can be to make the investment sound smaller, I would almost tell you has a opposite effect of what you thought it would. We are not in the environment anymore where the smaller the loan, the greater the appetite, for lack of better words. So they want to see smart businesses, smart opportunities, smart borrowers, and all of this plays part of it. Now, this is not documented anywhere. This isn't anything to live your every minute by. Just on my end, on my quick math rules, when we're working with candidates of just kind of mentally, where can they eventually get to? I've always said single unit, single territory, one brick and mortar location, whatever it may be, whatever the total project cost is. Any candidate that we're working with, I would tell them you want to be in a good, safe spot, have 40% of that total project in available liquid. It's not liquid you're going to use per se, the whole amount. It's not for the business. It's not for the bank, that whole amount. It's that post-closing liquid on top of your equity injection. So if I'm going to do a $300,000 loan, I'm probably going to want to, or a $300,000 total project, I'm probably going to want that candidate to have 120, 130,000 plus in available liquid, because I'm going to inject, say, $75,000, $80,000, and the remaining amount is what's left over as my post-closing liquid. On multi-unit deals, keep in mind this is probably more applicable for like 3 licenses and up, and when franchise fees start getting in the $90,000, $100,000 plus range. My easy math is whatever the total multi-unit franchise fees are, they would want to have that times 2. So for example, I'm paying $130,000 for 3 licenses of this brick and mortar fitness brand. I'm going to want to have $260,000 in available liquid. And again, it doesn't mean they need it for the business. It doesn't mean that it's going to be used right away. But because of the previous example, I'm paying franchise fees. I have to inject more on that project that don't have to deal with the other licenses. And then I need to have some runway left over. Before I jump into the next topic right here, but just because I saw a couple of the questions that have come up on this, but Dallas, from your end, correct me if I'm wrong, liquidity for the lenders is still pretty much viewed as pure liquid, checking, savings, and then they will view stocks, bonds, mutual funds in non-retirement asset accounts, right? So traditional stock portfolio, not retirement funds.
Correct. And, you know, unless they've been educated by Benetrends and understand that they can turn their 401k into a liquid, or utilize that even for collateral later if they don't utilize it for the investment.
Yeah, so that is what liquid is. Now, I know there were some other questions. Yes, of course, somebody could access something like a Rob's program to create that liquidity. But in my experience, banks don't deal with, well, if you do this, 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 and this, then maybe we would do it. You have to show them this is me right now. So if I'm going to use Rob's for liquid, the Rob's liquid is available as you're pursuing that loan. Or other assets. Now, some things where people get caught in hurdles, just because this was one of the questions, is most times if the lender wants some type of personal collateral for the loan, it will be in the form of a primary residence. So they usually don't love when somebody's also going to try to leverage that on a home equity line of credit for the liquidity. Plus, I don't think lenders like people taking borrowed funds to go and get more borrowed funds. And the other part about liquid, just a reminder, income, retirement, service to our country, and ongoing support that you get from, those are all great sources and earned sources of continued income. That's not liquid. They do not view income as like, now it will have an impact on how much liquid they want to see, but it doesn't replace the need to have that liquid available. And that's where we're seeing a lot of these brands struggling. The next part, and I want to bring Dallas back on this one, and I think a lot of the brands that are attending today really need to have revisiting of this aspect as well, is where you are in your development schedules. It's great to see the explosion of growth in the franchise industry in certain markets, and some of these emerging brands hitting amazing numbers, and established brands growing in different markets. And we love that you want to get them open faster and get these people to have 2, 3, 5 open. Just because you want somebody open 6, 8, 10 months on their second location after they signed the franchise agreement for their first, doesn't mean the banks have to follow that. You may want them open, but if they're seeking lending, some things do not change in this market. We have come out of certain things in COVID, but some things are pretty uniform. A bank is often not going to fund a second location without the first location having at least 12 to 18 months of data. They're at break even or profitability, or at least showing that trend. I've seen lenders adapt a little bit, but this is not going to change anytime soon drastically. And where it's not going to go is there's not really a bank, especially through an SBA program, that is going to consider a candidate's loan application for a second location when they haven't even opened their first. Dallas, am I off base there? Is that the appetite that you're seeing?
No, I think you're right on point. And, if we all put on our lender hats and we have a franchise candidate come to us and say, hey, I need to open location 2. And the loan officer is going to say, well, why? You're not even break even on location 1. Well, my development schedule says I have to open location 2 in 9 months. Well, the lender doesn't care. And I think as a franchisor, and this is going to circle back to your model, if we've seen break even creep up 2, 3, 4 months, does your development schedule reflect that as well? So, if 2 years ago, your clients hit break even in 6 months, so you wanted to have the second unit open in 9, if break even is now 9 to 12 months, you can't expect that candidate to open their second unit, or at least the lender is not going to expect that. So again, when we reevaluate the economic environment and the changes in the business model that franchisors need to take a look at, the development schedule is another component that needs to reflect the reality of the change in the business.
Now, and those are all great points. And all of these things, from the development schedule to liquidity requirements to appetites for the lenders. And that's why I love working with the team at FranData. And no one's saying that you have to. But what I will tell you is, as these banks, as Dallas mentioned before, are coming to franchising and saying they want to take on more, they really want to move fast. But what I'm noticing is sometimes they're going to slow down in order to move faster. So they come in and they really want to move, but they want to get laser focused on certain categories, industries, or brands. So making your brand more funding ready, knowing your candidate requirements, development schedule, how liquidity applies, and having things like the fund score, which, for lack of better words, and Dallas, I know this is more the FranData side, but individuals have a credit score. The fund score gives franchisors almost like their credit score. It shows lenders why brands have certain strengths in certain areas and why they're good lending decisions to make. And then, of course, the SBA, the franchise registry. I always remind people, of course, there's the franchise directory that so many franchisors confuse because they say, oh, I'm already approved on the franchise directory. All you've done by being on the directory is show that you are legally operating as a franchise and you follow certain things there. It does not say anything about the lendability or fundability or strength in all reality of your brand. So the SBA directory tells lenders if they can give you an SBA loan. Doesn't mean they have to. The registry is what shows lenders why they should give at least the franchise part of it should be a part of the reason they do that loan. But Dallas, any things that you've seen that your brands at FranData have used, any specific products more over another, what the lenders are looking for?
So, I think, again, with the events that happened through COVID and now the supply chain issues, labor issues, as well as the inflation all around, we're seeing more lenders reaching out to us to get that quote fund score, which is like a FICO score, because it helps them in their underwriting. And then if there is an issue with the loan, they can show the regulators that they did their due diligence. They reached out to an independent third party, and with the information that third party provided, it was still a good loan. If a brand has issues, and certainly through COVID we see brands that have had issues, there is a way that they can tell their story to a lender, even if that score does not reflect a great story. And that would be like a bank credit report where a brand can tell the story about changes they've made to both the model or maybe executive leadership that have alleviated those concerns that a lender may have. So your FDD can't tell a story necessarily. You can show data, but a bank credit report, you can sell your brand to a lender. Lenders are sometimes lazy, for lack of a better word. If there is a bank credit report, it simplifies their underwriting significantly. So we do have lenders reaching out to us to inquire about what brands have a bank credit report for all those reasons.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I will tell you this, in my experience, the bank is going to have a story for that loan or for that business. It's either going to be one that nobody's told them and they can come up with their own by saying, well, I haven't seen one of these where I live, or, I went and Googled this, or I looked at a failure rate from 10 years ago, or you can tell that story. And that story can be, here's what candidates we're attracting and why, here's our financial requirements, here's our data, here's how we used all of that to then go into our fund score and everything else. And it's really not the only strategy. I know we're getting to the end here, but it amazes me still to this day, the brands that don't have those funding partnerships. And whether it's Benetrends or any funding company out there, or if your franchisees have had success with a bank and not finding out which bank that was and keeping record of that. You meet brands and they say, oh, we don't need that yet. Who provides your trucks? Well, we have a relationship for that. Who provides this? Well, we have a relationship for that. Everyone's got something, but on the funding side, funding partnerships and relationships from FranData to Benetrends, any of the funding suppliers that are out there will help you right-size the brand and evaluate these candidates and look at the candidates' pre-qualifications. So it's all very important stuff. So I know we're right here at the tail end. I think some of the questions we did address. Anything that we did not, of course, you can always contact me at eric@benetrends.com. You can contact Dallas at dcurley@frandata.com. And again, any other questions, but yeah, the liquidity is going to be important. Retirement funds are bubble wrapped until somebody does them through a rollover. And I guess, Lauren, do I have time for one question to just address? Great. Because I did want to get Dallas's feedback here. Dallas, what is your view, either personally or even FranData, what you're hearing on the lending side? Because I think it is an important question of how these multi-level brands are being viewed at. So if I am a franchise and I'm emerging, but my parent company is this larger franchisor that owns 8 other brands that they've already established, does the bank look at it more as the parent? Does it look at it more of the individual? Does it not have any relevance at all? Any experience you've had there on the FranData side or from the banking side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, absolutely, I think lenders understand that if an emerging brand is part of a larger group, that's a positive. However, having said that, again, to go back to that fund score, if the brand itself doesn't provide us the information in the FDD or other publicly available information, typically that score is going to be a little bit lower because they may only provide the financial information of the parent. That's terrific. And, we use the example of Jiffy Lube, which is owned by Shell. So Shell is a fabulous, profitable company. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jiffy Lube is profitable, or that Shell may decide, listen, we're not making the money that we need to make off of Jiffy Lube, so we're going to cut it loose or shut it down. So, it depends on that individual brand. I think we can all agree that it doesn't matter which parent organization or PE firm owns brands. Within their portfolio, they have brands that are not as good as other brands in the portfolio. So lenders are still going to look at that brand individually. So yes, they may get a little bit of a bump because they're part of a larger organization, but within that organization, they're still looking at individual brands on an individual basis.
Awesome. Well, fortunately, my last question is a perfect transition to Lauren, because somebody asked if they can get a copy of today's presentation. So on my end, thank you so much, Dallas. Thank you so much to the IFA. Cannot wait for the upcoming events. I feel like it's wedding season in franchise world. We have a lot of great conferences, starting with the fan event next week, which I hope everybody in our industry is being a part of or contributing to. It's so important to support the IFA and what they do for our industry. Thank you so much for having us today, Lauren. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric and Dallas. This was excellent content and excellent feedback from all of you. We really do appreciate it. Again, this webinar was recorded, and along with the presentation deck will appear on our website early this evening. You'll be able to find that at community.franchise.org. Thank you very much again to Eric and Dallas and the whole Benetrends team. And again, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric. Have a great rest of the day.